Her art expresses a wide range of contemporary emotions through the traditional craft of quilting. She says, "I create art because I believe art makes a difference in our world. It is a gift we give ourselves, and it is a celebration of our very souls." On this edition of Art Now, we'll look at the work of Deborah Fell.
Hi, welcome to Art Now, a program where we talk to artists whose work is part of our community. I'm Pat Salmon, and I'll be your host. Our guest today is Deborah Fell. Deborah has a master's degree from Northern Illinois University, graduate work from the University of Illinois and the University of New Hampshire, and a fellowship at Northwestern University. She is a professional member of the Studio Art Quilt Associates, the Surface Design Association, and Art Quilt Network, and she has had over 20 years of education at the Quilt Surface Design Symposium in Columbus, Ohio. Her art has been shown at the United Nations Building and at St. Paul Trinity Chapel in New York and at the Moscone in San Francisco, as well as in the premier international exhibit Quilt National and several traveling exhibits. Thanks for being with us today, Deb.
Thank you.
Okay. The works you create are referred to as art quilts.
Yes.
What is an art quilt?
An art quilt is a distant cousin to a traditional quilt.
Okay.
Most people know what a quilt is because we identify that with home or grandma or something like that, and it gives us comfort. We cover up with it. It's very functional. And what happened with the art quilt, the function changed. Although it is structurally the same, so there are 3 layers, the front and the inside and the backing, the function becomes different and it becomes a hanging, and so the purpose becomes art as opposed to covering.
Right. Now, when did you first get interested in creating art, and of course, especially in quilting?
I've been an artist all my life. I've always been in the arts one way or the other, whether that's art, drama, music, and I've always wanted to make a quilt. I always thought that was kind of a neat idea, and we were living in New Hampshire maybe 25 years ago, and I had the opportunity for the first time. I didn't work full-time, so I had the opportunity, and I took 13 quilting classes, and I made 21 large quilts all by hand. The winters there are very long, very long. And I was very happy doing traditional quilting for several years, even though the little ladies kept saying, "You know, Deborah, those colors really aren't quite right." And I thought they looked right, but we had a phone call from a loved one who died in a car accident. She was working in France, and it was just such a tragedy, and it was just so heartbreaking, and I wasn't sure what to do, and I couldn't attend any of the services because I was still a nursing mom. And so I stayed up all night, and I made this quilt top, and it didn't look like any of the other quilt tops I'd ever made. And at that point in my career as a quilter, I'd never heard of an art quilt. And it just so happens that it was kind of coinciding with the very beginning of the art quilt movement, which actually didn't solidify and didn't really start until 1979 in Athens, Ohio.
Okay. Now, what do you particularly like about working in this medium?
I like to touch the fabric. I like to feel. I like the way everything feels, whether it's going through the machine or whether I'm stitching something by hand, or whether I'm just like exploring the difference between perhaps different kinds of fabric like silk or cotton. And even when my daughter was little, we used to play this game where we go through the store and touch something that was hanging, a garment, and then she'd have to guess what it was. And I mean, she got really good, so she could tell the difference between polyester, silk, satin, cotton. Yeah, so I just like to touch it.
Right, very tactile. Now, you recently retired from over 30 years of teaching teens at Urbana High School.
Yes.
With learning disabilities and behavior disorders.
Yes.
How did your art help you to work with those students?
Well, I think the big thing, it allowed me to keep a balance in my life, because it was a very stressful job, and a job which would entail sometimes some very difficult situations with young people that you basically had no control over. And it was really hard to watch young people in pain or struggle and struggle and struggle. And I could come home and do my art and kind of regroup and regain some balance. I also, before No Child Left Behind, and before the big emphasis on testing in the country, is in my speech communications class, we always did a community art project where it would go to the community somehow or go to somewhere in the building that was special. And the kids would all basically design the project. I had them doing quilting hands-on. Some of them did some dyeing and painting, and we've did a lot of stuff. But that, since you can't test it, that was something that the class basically, was cut.
Yeah, well, that's great. I guess we'll start by looking at some of your more abstract pieces.
Okay.
Here's one called Watercolors.
This piece is just something I really attempted to be very really restrict myself and focus just on simple line and color. And my intent was to create almost a wash similar to watercolors. And that's very hard to do with fiber reactive dyes. And that's basically all of the quilts you're going to see all started out with white fabric, and then they have been either dyed or painted or some other kind of surface design manipulation.
Okay. This one is Rebuilding.
This was actually the first one I did in my studio once we had our house built 10 years ago, and this one was actually a sequel to the piece I did called Tuesday's Child, Does God Have Enough Hands? And that piece is the one that's a permanent part of the art collection at Ground Zero.
Yeah, and we will be seeing that one.
Yes, and this one was the one I did after, so kind of simultaneously as we were building our house, and as all these, the wood went up and the structure went up, and throughout those months after September 11th, we watched the World Trade Center continue to come down. And so it seems like if you really look at this piece, you'll see pieces of that reflected in there, where there's almost tumbling structures, and then structures that look like they're being built and they're very solid. And that's just sort of emotionally where I was, and I think a lot of my work is a response to what's happening in my life at that particular time.
Right. Okay. This is Reclamation, and we've also got a detail of it afterward.
Okay, well, the Reclamation Series is a series that I started because my daughter challenged me. And she said my art wasn't green enough, and she wasn't speaking about color. And so I decided I would create a series that basically, the entire series was made out of tiny little scraps that normally you would throw away, or other repurposed kinds of objects. For example, in some of them, and you can see a small edge here of a piece of torn canvas that has paint on it, and other tiny small pieces that really you wouldn't be able to make them functional. There's exposed batting. I actually have some torn Starbucks coffee huggers that I've painted and then stitched. There's remnants and pieces of clothing that perhaps the hem that you cut off on some pants, and they're all in there, and then it makes it work. And what begins to happen with this is it begins, the abstract colors all working together begins to get a sensibility of a landscape, even though it's still quite abstracted out.
Right. Okay, this is Painted Squares.
Painted Squares was in Quilt National in 2003, and Quilt National is in Athens, Ohio, and Quilt National was the venue that started the art quilt movement in 1979. It was a very great honor to have a piece be a part of this, and this was, I wanted to take the traditional, kind of square that we see in so many traditional quilts, and then just simplify it down to its main basic form, right. and so it's literally just painted on there.
Right. And this is Painted Squares too.
And this particular piece, again, starting out with white fabric, I think really gives the sense of, is it a painting or is it a quilt? Because if I just showed you this slide and asked you that question, what would you say?
Right.
How would you answer that? The answer could go both ways. If you didn't know I was a quilter, this is the kind of dimension and depth that can be created with simple use of form and color and line. And
Right.
that's one of the things that I enjoy the most. And it's very, very serendipitous. Nothing is planned out. I just start painting.
This is Journey.
And the same thing with the Journey series. I have enjoyed doing this series now for about close to 15 years, and I just love the motion of swirls and the motion of a spiral and what you can create with that, with light and dark, and how it can bring you in. And I love the bright colors. And so basically this is just, simply a painting that starts out with a very random black swirl that's painted on, and then I go in and I paint the rest of it, and then I add fabric on top of that, and then more paint on top of that.
Right. And this is Journey 18.
This is a detail, so this gives you a little bit more of a sense of it. This particular Journey piece has more fabric on top of it as opposed to the painting. The painting here is in the background, and the fabric is on top of it, and then very, very much stitching, and then the stitching really creates the density. The density then makes it very flat and makes it very agreeable as far as hanging up and working in a space like that.
Right.
New Breath is another piece, again, that was started out with white fabric. This has a sister piece over in one of the Carl buildings, and it's again playing with. If you look, it's a simple square, and so what's the connection between art quilts and quilts? And I think you see it's right there. Although it seems very elaborated out or maybe twisted out or something, but fundamentally the shapes are there. If you look, you can see the connections.
Right.
This one was actually a monoprint. Oh. So I actually took dark blue paint, thickened dye, actually not paint, and squirted it out on the table, and then squirted out yellow paint in the middle, and then I threw some fabric on top of it, and then with a 29-cent paint squeegee, I started moving the fabric.
Yeah.
Moving the paint as I, kind of squeegeed the fabric, and that's how I sort of got that. And then part of it is taking a monoprint would be taking an image and having it right there on the table, and then throwing your fabric on top of that. So it was sort of done with two different methods.
Okay. This is Green Screen.
And this too, again, starting out with white fabric, and again, very, very much the simple shapes. I love the simple shapes of squares and circles and spirals. And what can you do to create depth in a two-dimensional piece? And I think that's what's really exciting about fabric and the ability to be able to manipulate what you can do with the depth with color. And then shape, and then different kinds of elements. If you see the small squares on the right there, that's actually metallic paint, and that was done with screen printing. So all the different textures and different materials allow you to create. It's like, well, what was there first? And some of it actually looks like it's coming off of the piece.
Right.
And that's what I think is really exciting about the particular medium.
Okay. Well, this one is Echo Lines, and there are several Echo ones that we'll be looking at here.
Again, this one, the main part of this piece started out with screen printing, with textile inks. So I experimented with a different, little bit different sort of medium there. And what I'll do is I'll create like a great big giant piece, and it'll be all these inked out spirals and stuff, and then I'll paint another piece, and then I just take them all and I cut them all up and then reassemble them. Okay. So that's what happens. But the goal is then that the second piece and the third piece all sort of interrelate to so they can all kind of play together nice in the sandbox.
Right. Right.
And this is a fairly recent piece. This piece is also very much screen printed, and this is kind of deconstructed screen printing, which means it's sloppy deconstruct. It's screen printing. It's not in screen printing. Traditionally, what you want to do is you want to get these crisp, detailed lines. Well, what I like to do is go out into the woods and find fallen, dead leaves and things, and I'll put that underneath my screen print, and then drag dye over that. So then what I'm getting is this very fractured, very organic sensibility, as opposed to something very clear and clean.
Right.
So I'm doing that on purpose.
Okay.
I really like it.
Okay, let's take a minute here, and can you talk a little bit about how you actually put together a quilt?
Yes, it's, again, this goes back to traditional quilting, and so you're going to, have the top in the middle. It's like a sandwich, and again, here you can sort of see this, and we've got the top, and this is all painted and screen printed, and then the backing, and in the middle you can actually see this is exposed batting. And the batting that I like to use is batting that's all cotton, and it makes it, again, very dense and almost very stiff, because what happens with all the processes, then it begins and then it starts to hang like this, as opposed to being kind of puffy and getting, all yummy and stuff underneath it. So that's where, so you basically, you make the top first, and I complete the top. Usually everything is done on the top, and then I put the middle in, and I put the backing on, and then I quilt it.
Okay.
And in a traditional quilt, you would never finish it like this. Some people would say, well, what's wrong here? And that's the way I like to finish. It's not squared. I don't square anything up, and I often leave threads on it. That's all done on purpose. And you can see, the exposed canvas on the back and throughout the sides with the raw edges.
Right.
And I just like it that way.
Yeah, I do too. Okay, let's see. I think we need to move on to some of the commissioned pieces. One of my questions would be, how do you work to satisfy both the person who requested the piece and yourself as an artist?
You know what, there's been a learning curve. And at first, I didn't do commissions. And then the first few times I tried, I failed horrendously. At least I felt that I failed. And so I think that, it's something that you can learn to do. And actually, it was a client who taught me how to do a commission well. This wonderful man from New York, from Manhattan, found my website, and I did a piece for his wife. And the thing is it was so interactive that he kind of taught me how to make it work pleasantly for both people. Because, and for example, if a client says, well, I really want blue in it, I can pull out a catalog of dyed fabric that I have, and I can show them 50 different colors of blue and say, well, which blue? And get it a little bit closer. And are all commissions successful? No, it's not a perfect world. But I'm willing to do them now, whereas I was very hesitant in the beginning of my career, but I've had a lot of commissions now, and with a lot of success. And that's primarily how my income is generated is through commissions, and people will talk to me about their passions and what they love. This particular piece is about a golf course.
Oh, I'll be darned.
I've never golfed in my life, so I had absolutely no idea what all the terms were. I still can't tell you what the title means. This was, again, a family piece. Their family cabin up in Door County, and so so a lot of people have been really, really happy with different kinds of things. And this is like the eagle is not something I would normally do, but this woman, it was a beautiful commission because she gave me total freedom, and she just said, I needed to pick a decade. She was commissioning artists to do with an art with an eagle in it, and what would this decade look like? So I picked a decade that hasn't happened yet, and that actually is the decade between 2000 and 20 to 30. So what would happen? And so my question is and those are all world flags in the background. So the question is the world coming together or is the world coming apart?
Right. And there's a close-up.
There's a close-up, and you can see a lot of heavy stitching in that. Very realistic. I mean, a lot of my stuff is very abstract, but that's not what, you know, if somebody says this is what they want, it's my job as an artist to give them that. And and this was a recent commission. This was a canyon in Arizona, and for a retirement for a woman who was moving out there and absolutely loved the canyons and the rocks and the evergreens.
Okay, and then if we move to the next one, I know one of your most famous local quilts was the one you did for Extreme Makeover TV show in 2009. Would you like to say just a little bit about that?
It was a really incredible experience, but I am happy that that's not my job full time.
Okay.
Going from place to place in the country and being in a pressure cooker like that, because it was really hard to pull off. And they first contacted me a few weeks before they came to town, and I got a phone call from a producer in LA, and she said, well, you know, we got your name from the city, and we heard you were an extreme quilter, so we'd like you to be a part of the show, so maybe you could make a pillow. And I said, I don't know how to make a pillow.
Right.
So I said, I'll tell you what, look at my website, and if you're interested, call me back. If not, it was really nice talking to you, you know. So she calls me back in 5 minutes, and she's like, oh, I get it. Okay. So, so it kind of evolved from me being involved somehow of maybe, first I was going to donate a piece, and then I thought, oh, I'm off the hook. I don't have to try to create a piece in 3 days. You know? But I couldn't complain. They're building a whole house in 3 days. What could I say? I mean, you know, so I had to keep it quiet. And so then it kind of, then it was like, well, then I'm going to do a piece for the house. But then by Saturday morning, and keep in mind the bus moves on Tuesday afternoon.
Oh, gee.
So Saturday morning, they asked me to meet with Ty Pennington, and they wanted me to do his special art project that he had for the bedroom, and so it was really pretty difficult to pull off. He was very nice, he was very calm, and I was very straight with him. I told him what would and wouldn't work in the time parameters and the kind of materials that we had, and so it turned out that, you know, the people loved it, and he loved it. It was a large collaged quilt with on wood, 5x5 piece of plywood.
Oh, gee.
And so it was a little out of my medium, but I made it work, and that was a really valuable experience.
Great. Well, the next pieces we're going to look at, I think, show how art can act as a bridge between the events that touch our lives and your emotional reaction to them.
This is called In the Arms of an Angel, and it was my response to a teacher who died suddenly in her kindergarten classroom when my children were young. And it was a very difficult time to get through, and this was my way to get from point A to point B.
Right. This is the Bruin Wallace
This is a series that it's actually right behind you. That's the piece that's behind you. And after touching the Berlin Wall, I was moved, and whatever it is, it usually starts, it ends up somehow coming out in my art. And I just kept imagining what it would be like to have this giant, enormous wall with barbed wire and everything in the middle of Champaign and Urbana, and trying to fathom what that would be like. And so I'm expressing that through my art.
Right, and there's a bit of detail on that. This is Witness Trees.
Witness Trees was my reaction to, my daughter is going to college in Germany, so I've spent some time there, and this was my reaction to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp where Anne Frank died in northern Germany. And I was very moved by this vast space and the whole idea that nobody knew about these concentration camps. And certainly communication was different and the world was different. However, it was like on the, they were on the edge, the outskirts of town, and it wasn't like there was this great big giant wall that you couldn't see through. And I just kept walking through this vast space and noticing the perimeter of this space, all these trees, and that no one saw, and then I just had this sense that the trees saw it. And so that's where the image in the design came from. Right. That just closed at the Chicago Cultural Center, and it's in an exhibit sponsored by the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons.
Okay. And this is part of the World War II series.
Yes, and again, this one, which is right behind you, actually. And if you look at this piece, you can see this is a memorial that was in this small execution yard in Dresden. And I guess I felt, I feel compelled to tell stories that people might not know about. Mm-hmm. And when my daughter first went to Germany, she was going to school in this building, and the building was a former execution yard where 2,000 people had been killed.
Yeah.
Bars were on all the windows. Mm-hmm. And and I just kept trying to imagine what it must have been like. And most of the people who were murdered were people who were innocent, and they objected politically or something like that.
Right.
And so there were, I think it was 2,000 people who lost their lives there. And I was really moved by the sensibility of the place and the memorial that was there.
Right.
And there it is again in my art.
Right.
There's a close-up.
Right.
And you can see that the sea actually is part of the the actual monument, and it talks about the 2,000 fighters against fascism and stuff, and it was
right. Okay, and there's another one.
This is another piece responding to the same situation.
Okay.
This particular piece is Tuesday's Child, Does God Have Enough Hands? This is a piece that's a permanent part of the art collection at the former Ground Zero headquarters at St. Paul's Trinity Church in Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And the St. Paul's Church was the only building that was left standing. And it was like the little church that could.
Right.
And a tree actually saved its life. And they've since bronzed those tree roots, and it's a sculpture now in the churchyard where the cemetery is. And when I just, I had to do something.
Right.
And certainly I wasn't going to create a piece like this and then sell it or make money from it or do anything like that. I didn't know why. I just had to make it.
Right.
I didn't want to put it in my home.
Right.
And it was actually the Manhattan man who'd commissioned me to do a piece for his family was instrumental in getting this piece at St. Paul Trinity Church. He did the footwork. He was an attorney in Manhattan.
That's great. And then this last one?
This particular piece is a close-up of the Journey of Hope in America exhibit. And this piece is called And Then There Was Hope. And it's a picture of Obama. Mm-hmm. And it's actually based on a photograph I took when I met him when he was running for the Senate here.
Oh, okay.
And at the university, because the copyright issue, I couldn't just take a picture and create art from that. Mm-hmm. I'd have to, so I own that. It was very mm-hmm. close to him, and when he first started coming to the university, there would be 25 people there. No one knew who he was.
Yeah.
In the very, very beginning.
Right.
So this particular piece has actually been purchased as a part of that exhibit, and will either be a permanent part of the National African American Museum or possibly the Presidential Library.
That's great. Wonderful. Okay, thanks again very much for being with us.
Absolutely. It's really been, it's always good to have to articulate about your passions and your work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching Art Now. Our guest has been Deborah Fell, and you can see her art locally at Carl Clinic and the Carl Clinic Cancer Center, Urbana High School, the First Presbyterian Church, the Illinois Artisan Galleries in Chicago and Springfield, and at her website, which is www.deborahfell.com. Deborah will also soon be an artist in residence at the Mendocino Arts Center in Mendocino, California. We hope that you've enjoyed today's show, and we also hope it will inspire you to explore the local art scene and to make your own art now.